You remember certain things when your body's on the verge of going under, moments when time folds in on itself, and what should be terrifying becomes oddly calm. That morning, the hallway smelled like bleach and fear, and the clock on the wall refused to move. I was laying on that stiff hospital bed, my back aching from the cold vinyl beneath me, trying to hold it together with dry humor and shallow breaths. The nurse had just given me the rundown anesthesia, incision, gallbladder out, simple enough, but there was a pause in her voice, like even she knew nothing is ever truly simple when it comes to cutting open a body. I nodded, smiled, said thank you, and looked toward Doug, hoping to see some version of concern or hell, even fake concern would have been enough. Instead, he was standing by the window, sipping burnt hospital coffee from a styrofoam cup like we were at a damn rest stop. He hadn't touched me all morning. Not a hand squeeze, not a kiss on the forehead. Nothing. Just that distant look he got when his mind was somewhere else, usually watching a football game or rerunning an argument from 5 years ago in his head like it was still fresh. "Don't die, who'll cook then?" he muttered, not even looking at me. Just like that. 7 words that sounded like a joke, tossed over his shoulder like an afterthought, as if I were just stepping out to the store instead of being prepped for surgery. I laughed. It was weak, breathy, more habit than anything real. Because what the hell else was I supposed to do? Cry in front of 2 nurses, the surgeon, and the man who couldn't be bothered to change the sheets while I was puking my guts out 2 nights ago? But that laugh was the last act of the old me. Something inside shifted as soon as it left my lips, like I saw the relationship for the first time without the fog, without the weight of history or the desperate hope that maybe tomorrow he'd try a little harder. It wasn't just the comment. God, if it were just one comment, I could have brushed it off, filed it under dumb things husbands say, and moved on. But it wasn't. It was years of moments like that, small and sharp, like little bits of glass you only notice when they've already cut you. It was the time I had breast cancer 10 years ago, and he missed my second chemo session because the guys were already at the course. It was the Christmas I ended up cooking dinner with one arm in a sling, and he said, "You're better at it anyway." It was every birthday card signed without a note, every vacation we planned that ended with him watching sports on his phone, every night I went to bed feeling lonelier beside him than I ever did when I was single. They say marriages don't end with explosions, they end with silence. And I'd lived in that silence for so long, I forgot what noise sounded like. Until that moment. I stared at the ceiling while they adjusted my 4. The light above me buzzed softly, the kind of sound you only notice when your heart's too loud. I thought about the way Doug's face looked when he said it, blank, casual, like he was reading a damn weather report. I wondered if he even realized how dead I already felt lying there, not from the surgery or the illness, but from the knowing that if I didn't die today, I would still be dying slowly, inch by inch, in that house with him. The nurse leaned down to check my ID bracelet and asked if I was okay. I nodded. My throat was dry, but my mind was clearer than it had been in years. "This is the last time I'll ever let him make me feel small," I whispered, more to myself than anyone else. And I meant it. I let them wheel me down the hallway, the fluorescent lights passing overhead like judgmental ghosts. I let go of the fear. I let go of the hope. I let go of the woman who always made excuses for him, who covered up the bruises he left, not with fists, but with words that hit just as hard. I wasn't sure what would happen after the surgery, but I knew what wouldn't happen. I wouldn't go back to being her. I wouldn't go back to that quiet kitchen, waiting for his voice to tell me what I was worth. The gurney stopped. A nurse told me to count backward from 10. I took one last look at the man who used to bring me tulips and now couldn't bring himself to say, "I love you," before they cut me open. 10. 9. 8. I wasn't afraid of dying. I was terrified of surviving and still letting him kill me slowly. When I opened my eyes, the first thing I noticed wasn't the pain, it was the silence. That eerie kind of silence that doesn't feel peaceful, but empty, like someone forgot to fill in the background music of your life. The lights above me were softer now, the edges of my vision less harsh, but the pain that pulsed just beneath my ribs reminded me I was still here, still stitched together, still on this side of the ground. I blinked a few times, trying to ground myself, and realized the nurse was already fussing over some monitor near my feet. She smiled when she saw I was awake and told me everything had gone well. I nodded, because what else could I do? I couldn't tell her the surgery wasn't the hardest part of my week, not by a long shot. My mouth was dry, my throat was sore, and there was a dull ache in my side that made breathing feel like an inconvenience. But the worst pain wasn't physical, not even close. It was the mental inventory that started the minute the drugs wore off. Like my brain, groggy and rattled, had picked up a clipboard and started walking through the halls of memory with a flashlight. And once it started flipping those old dusty boxes open, I couldn't stop it. It's strange how sharp things become after you've been cut open, how a scalpel to the flesh can turn your mind into a razor. I lay there in that stiff recovery bed and started seeing it all for what it was, without the soft focus filter I used to apply when trying to make my life look normal. Doug and I had been married for 27 years. Almost 3 damn decades of shared taxes, burned dinners, and late-night arguments whispered too loud behind closed doors. People always said we seemed fine, that word everyone uses when they don't want to dig too deep. I started remembering things I hadn't thought about in years. The time I planned a weekend trip for our 10th anniversary, spent $4,000 on a cabin in Montana because I wanted something romantic, something we could remember when we were old and gray. Doug spent 3 days watching baseball reruns on VHS, said he was relaxing, and told me to stop being so dramatic when I asked if we could maybe go for a hike or at least eat dinner without the game blaring in the background. That tape player wasn't even ours. I think the cabin must have had it from the early 90s. Who the hell watches tapes in 2018? And then there were the small comments, the ones I used to laugh off because they seemed harmless until you heard them stacked together like bricks building a prison cell. You're not gonna wear that, are you? Well, you're the one who wanted kids, remember? I married a woman, not a therapist. They seemed like throwaway lines until I realized he never actually threw them away. He kept them close, pulled them out when he needed to shut me up, quiet me down, make me doubt myself just enough to stay. The door creaked open sometime that afternoon, and in walked my sister Jenna, arms full of pink tulips and a smirk that could cut glass. She didn't waste time. Dropped the flowers in the chair, leaned against the windowsill, and said, "So you gonna leave his ass this time, or should I draw you a map out?" She always had a way of getting to the damn point. I looked at her, this younger version of me who never let any man tell her who to be, and I didn't say anything for a long moment. Then I did something I hadn't done in months. I nodded. Not a big, dramatic gesture. Just a quiet, certain one. She blinked, like she wasn't sure she heard me right, then gave me a little nod back. That was enough. That moment, between two sisters who'd seen each other through hell and worse, was more powerful than 1,000 therapy sessions. Later that night, when the nurses thought I was asleep, I pulled out my phone and opened up my email. My fingers were trembling a bit, not from weakness, but from the kind of strength that hasn't been used in years. I typed in "divorce attorney" near me and scrolled until I found someone with the kind of face that looked like it had seen some shit. Her name was Rachel Palmer, and she'd been practicing law longer than I'd been married. That was good. I didn't need sympathy, I needed strategy. I sent her a short message. Told her I wasn't safe exactly, but I wasn't in danger either. That I needed out, clean and quiet. That I'd been planning this without realizing I was planning it for years. And I asked her one question: can we do this without him knowing until it's too late? I hit send before I could second-guess myself. The next morning, as the sky turned that early hospital gray, a new email lit up on my screen. "I've handled worse, but I'll need your signature before discharge." My fingers hovered over the screen, my heart beating like a warning bell. I was still healing, still stitched up, still bruised, but for the first time in years, I wasn't confused. I wasn't scared. I was wide awake. Coming home from the hospital after surgery feels like stepping into a world that hasn't been told you almost died. The wind still pushes the same, the mail still piles at the door, and people honk like you aren't carrying stitches under your skin. Doug picked me up late, of course, claimed traffic, though I know the route from the hospital to our house like the lines on my own tired face. He didn't bring flowers. Didn't hold my bag. Didn't ask the nurse any follow-up questions or even pretend to care what the discharge instructions said. He said, "You good?" And when I nodded, that was it. That was all I got. When we pulled into the driveway, I sat in the car for a minute longer than I needed to, staring at the front door like it was the gate to a life I didn't want to re-enter. I'd expected some version of comfort waiting inside, maybe not love, but at least an attempt at decency. Instead, I walked into a house that smelled like reheated pizza and socks. The kitchen sink was overflowing with dishes that had long since dried, crusted with grease and God knows what else, like some kind of middle finger waiting just for me. There was a pile of laundry on the hallway bench, mine, of course, and Doug glanced at it like it had offended him personally. "I tried to wait for you to do it," he said, not joking, not even a hint of irony in his voice. Just a statement, like he expected a thank you for his restraint. I looked at him, standing there in his ratty t-shirt and cargo shorts, and something inside me curled up and died, something small that had still hoped he might surprise me. I smiled at him, though. Smiled wide, smiled hard, smiled like the damn Mona Lisa if she'd been fed up for decades. I said nothing. Not a word. And that silence, I could tell, unnerved him more than a slap across the face would have. The next 3 days, I played the part. Moved slowly, winced when I bent over, took my meds on schedule in front of him. He offered to make dinner once and ended up microwaving 2 frozen burritos, tossing one on a plate like he was doing me a favor. I thanked him. I told him it was perfect. And then, when he went to bed early to scroll through his phone in silence, I stayed up and got to work. Everything had to look normal. That was the key. No suspicion. No change in routine. I waited until I heard his soft, snore-choked breathing from the bedroom, then padded to the office and started digging through the drawers we hadn't opened in years. The joint account passwords, the retirement documents, the deed to the house, everything I would need to break free from the man who treated me like an unpaid maid with a heartbeat. I scanned everything on my old laptop, saved the files under fake names, uploaded them to cloud storage I'd created weeks ago when my gut first told me something had to change. I called the movers next. A woman answered, her voice tired but kind, and I told her I needed discretion. She said she understood. Said she'd done this kind of thing before, women moving out without wanting their husbands to know until it was done. She gave me a date, 3 days from now. I said that'd be fine. I told her to park around the block and not ring the doorbell. I gave her the inventory in my calmest voice, like we were planning a weekend picnic instead of a surgical extraction from a broken life. Then I transferred half of our liquid savings to a separate account. Not all, just enough to get started. Enough to show him I was serious without draining the pool and leaving a note that said, "Good luck, asshole." I thought about taking more, but I didn't want revenge, I wanted freedom. Those two things are not the same. The next night, I sat on the couch with Doug, pretending to watch TV while he scrolled through his phone, laughing at some video he didn't share with me. I glanced over and saw him texting someone, probably Jim or Mark from work, but I didn't ask. I didn't care. That was the moment I realized how numb I'd become to his presence. He could have been a coat rack or a shadow on the wall. There was no connection anymore, only routine. And routine, when it's this dead, can suffocate a person without ever touching them. After he fell asleep that night, I walked into the bedroom and opened his sock drawer. Same drawer where he kept old receipts, expired coupons, and random junk he never touched. I placed the letter there, folded neatly, right next to a birthday card I gave him 5 years ago that I could tell, by the unbroken seal, he never even bothered to open. That card had a handwritten message inside about how I'd loved him even through the hard times, how I'd believed in us even when it hurt. I stared at that card for a long time, the irony hitting so hard it almost knocked the breath out of me. Then I closed the drawer gently, wiped my hands on my thighs like I'd just finished something sacred, and whispered, "Let's see if you read this one." I didn't sleep that night. Didn't even lie down. I just sat by the window, watched the moon crawl across the sky like it had something to prove, and waited for the final day to arrive. Because when you're done being someone's afterthought, the only thing left to do is disappear like you never needed them in the first place. Doug came home like it was just another goddamn Tuesday, keys jingling in one hand, talking to himself about traffic like anyone was still around to give a shit. He walked through the door expecting the usual, me somewhere in the back of the house, folding laundry or stirring something in a pot, probably tired, probably smiling anyway. Because I'd learned how to pretend so well I almost forgot what it felt like to actually mean it. But the moment he stepped into the kitchen, I know something in his brain registered wrong, like a gear slipped, like a part of the machine that ran his normal day-to-day life suddenly jammed. The kitchen was empty, not messy, not dirty, just stripped clean like someone had cut it out of the house with a scalpel. No toaster, no coffee maker, no spice rack cluttering the counter, no little ceramic bowl I used to keep onions in, not even the damn refrigerator magnets. The cabinets hung open like mouths mid-scream, shelves bare and echoing. The sink, once always full of dishes he meant to get to, gleamed like it had been baptized. His eyes probably darted around, confused, maybe even annoyed. He was always like that, annoyed before concerned, irritated before curious. I imagine he called out my name, maybe once, maybe twice, with that half-laugh he did when he thought I was just being dramatic again. But I wasn't hiding in the bedroom, or taking a nap, or crying quietly in the shower like I used to do after dinner. I was gone. He made it to the bedroom and found the closet gutted. Not raided, not messy, just cleared out. All my clothes, my shoes, my robe I always forgot to hang up, the perfume bottle he used to compliment me on 10 years ago, it was all gone. Like I'd never existed in that space, like I'd been erased without a trace. Well, almost without a trace. The envelope was on the kitchen counter, centered neatly, not shoved or crumpled or desperate-looking. Just placed there like a final word, like the punctuation mark at the end of a sentence that had gone on too long. Inside were two things. One, a formal letter printed on firm white paper, signed by Rachel Palmer, stating in clear, emotionless language that divorce proceedings had been initiated and all necessary legal steps were in motion. And two, a smaller handwritten note from me, written in the kind of pen I always kept hidden from him because he always borrowed and never returned them. I didn't die, but the woman you married did. Good luck reheating frozen dinners. That was it. No tears. No long-winded explanations. No second chances or cryptic goodbyes. Just that one cold, hard truth. The version of me who tolerated that life, who watered dead things and called it commitment, was gone. Dead, if you want to be poetic about it. And in her place stood a woman who knew exactly what she wanted, and it wasn't him. I don't know how long he stood there holding that note, reading and rereading it like maybe there was a hidden message if he tilted the page the right way. Maybe he walked through the house checking every drawer, every corner, every closet, half expecting to find me hiding behind a curtain like this was some twisted game of hide and seek. Maybe he even laughed once, that sad little laugh he used when he got nervous, the one that made his mouth twitch but never reached his eyes. Eventually, he must have tried to call. Probably once, then again, then 10 more times, each time expecting the ring to stop and my voice to answer, to explain, to beg him to understand. But the call went straight to voicemail. Not because my phone was off, but because I'd already changed the number. That old life was behind me now, buried like a time capsule in a backyard I'd never dig up again. While he sat there surrounded by the echoes of everything he'd ignored, I was already hours away, driving through the mountains with the windows down, the wind tangling in my hair like it used to when I was 23 and wild enough to believe in fresh starts. The road curved like a ribbon unraveling ahead of me, the air cooler, the sky clearer, and for the first time in years, my chest didn't feel tight from holding my breath around someone who didn't notice I'd gone silent. In the passenger seat sat a small bag, filled with the bare essentials, my laptop, a framed photo of my sister and me from our trip to Seattle, a notebook full of half-finished thoughts and recipes I'd once dreamed of writing into a book. I didn't take anything that reminded me of Doug, not a single thing. I didn't want the smell of him, the sound of him, the memory of him sticking to my new beginning like old gum on a shoe. But there was one thing I kept, just one, tucked quietly inside the glove compartment like a tiny, ticking secret. At the next rest stop, I pulled over and popped open the glove box. Inside was a small box, square and worn around the edges, the kind you might mistake for a jewelry box if you weren't paying attention. I opened it slowly, the air inside my car suddenly still, like even the wind wanted to know what I was doing. There it was, his wedding ring. Not mine. His. The same ring he slipped on his finger 27 years ago, the one he used to fiddle with during meetings and arguments and lazy Sunday afternoons. I had taken it the night before, while he slept, snoring lightly like nothing in the world was wrong, like his wife hadn't been planning her escape 3 feet away. I held it up to the light, watching the way it caught the setting sun. It looked smaller now, less significant, like a relic from another world. I didn't throw it out the window, didn't hurl it into the woods like some dramatic movie scene. I just looked at it, held it, felt its weight, and then put it back in the box, shut it tight, and placed it back where I found it. Some things you don't destroy. Some things you save, not because they're sacred, but because they're proof. Proof of who you were and how far you've come. I started the car again, my hands steady on the wheel, the road humming beneath me like a promise, and I drove deeper into the mountains without looking back. The apartment was small in a way that made it feel safe, like a room you could clean in an hour and never lose anything in again. There was one bedroom, a kitchen that barely fit a table and 2 chairs, and a tiny balcony that overlooked the kind of parking lot filled with old sedans, quiet people, and the slow, predictable rhythm of people who had already had enough drama for one lifetime. I chose it for the silence. Not the dead silence of my old house, the kind that came after arguments or meals eaten without words, but the kind of silence that welcomes you, like water that doesn't resist when you finally let yourself float. I moved in on a Monday. The landlord didn't ask too many questions, just handed over the keys and warned me the heater rattled at night, and the upstairs neighbor had a heavy-footed dog. I smiled and said that was fine. I'd lived with worse. My new life began in pieces, not fireworks. I didn't wake up every morning with joy in my chest. Some days I still reached for the second coffee mug by habit. Some nights I lay awake wondering what Doug was doing, whether he even missed me, whether he was angry or sad or just relieved the same way I was. But the weight was gone, that pressure in my lungs that had followed me around for decades. I could breathe now, even if it was still shallow some days. Jenna called on the 3rd night, and I finally answered. Her voice cracked the moment she heard mine, and she said, "You really did it, didn't you?" I told her I had. She laughed, then she cried, and I listened as she went on a 10-minute rant about how she'd been praying I'd leave that man since 2009. I told her she should have prayed louder. We laughed until it hurt. She asked where I was, and I said, 2 states over, somewhere quiet. I'm not telling you where yet. She didn't push. She just said, good. Let it be yours, all of it. And I was doing just that, making it mine. I bought a plant, something leafy and green with no flowers, because I never liked flowers as much as I pretended to. I cooked whatever the hell I felt like, even if that meant breakfast at 9 at night or wine and toast for dinner. I didn't fold laundry right away. I played music I used to love before Doug started making fun of it, saying it sounded like hippie funeral dirges. I let it play loud, let it fill every corner of the room, let it remind me that I still had preferences, tastes, and opinions that weren't filtered through someone else's approval. But there was something I didn't tell Jenna. Something I didn't tell anyone, not even the nice woman at the bank who helped me open my new account, not even Rachel the lawyer who kept telling me how strong I was in her curt, efficient emails. The day I finished unpacking my last box, I'd found something wedged deep in the back of Doug's sock drawer, something I hadn't noticed when I slipped that goodbye letter into its place like a final nail in a quiet coffin. It was another letter. Folded. Unopened. Addressed to me. The envelope was yellowed slightly at the edges, the kind of paper that sits undisturbed for months, maybe a year. I almost didn't read it. My first instinct was to rip it up, throw it in the trash, let the past stay buried where it belonged. But curiosity, that old cruel itch, got the better of me. He'd written it last year. Long before the surgery. Long before the divorce lawyer and the fake smile I wore like armor. In the letter, he said things I didn't think he was capable of saying. He talked about his father's death, about how it shattered him in a way he never admitted. He said he'd been numb, walking through our life like a ghost. He said he knew he hadn't been the husband I deserved, that he'd failed to show up, failed to hear me, failed to even ask if I was okay on the days when I clearly wasn't. He asked for help, not in a big dramatic way, but in that simple, quiet voice men use when they're too scared to look weak. He said, "I don't know how to fix it, but I want to try if you'll let me." That line stayed with me for days. I read it again and again and again, like it might say something different the 5th or 15th time. But it never did. It was still a year too late. And it was still buried in a drawer he never mentioned. I never replied. I didn't tell him I found it. I didn't tell Jenna, either, because I knew what she'd say, that it didn't matter, that men like Doug always say they'll change when they think they're about to lose something they took for granted. And maybe she's right. Maybe that letter was just another empty promise, another weightless apology designed to keep me tethered. But sometimes, late at night, I wonder what would have happened if he'd handed it to me instead of hiding it. I wonder if part of him ever meant to give it to me at all. I wonder if I'd read it back then, when I still had hope, if I would have stayed. And that's the part that guts me, not the leaving, not the loneliness, not the starting over, but the not knowing. I never threw the letter away. I keep it in a drawer, next to my passport and a candle I light whenever the apartment feels too quiet. I don't know why I keep it. Maybe as a reminder. Maybe as evidence. Maybe just because throwing it away would make it all too final. One night, with the windows open and the air warm and still, I lit that candle and stood in the middle of my little kitchen, barefoot, holding a glass of wine I didn't feel guilty for pouring. I stared at the drawer where the letter was tucked away and whispered into the silence, I didn't just leave him. I found me. And that was the truth, or at least the version of the truth I was ready to live with. The camera, if there were one, would have pulled back then, past the window, past the fire escape, past the quiet street below, settling on the soft flicker of the candlelight and the single unopened letter sitting in the dark drawer, still waiting to be answered. Maybe I'll read it one more time. Maybe I won't. But I'll decide when I'm ready. And that choice? That one's mine,